Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives. Not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. And now said correctly to USA Prepare. Broadcasting 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. We're on the telephone today. Rather than using a digital connection, we are on the telephone. Why? Well, the internet's down. And we'll tell you a little bit more about what that really means to us and to you. Rich Scheben's with us. Nathan is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Thank you, Vincent Finelli. Always an honor to be on your show.
It's great broadcasting with you. You know, I mentioned, let me just look. Oh, red light. It's alternating between red and green. I'm talking about our internet router. What does that mean? That means the internet's not connected. What does that mean? That means that CenturyLink is down once again. I wanted to call them last night, but I couldn't get anybody on the phone. And I said to myself, here's what I would say to these guys. So I was talking to one of my friends, and he said, do you know what the worst internet provider is? I'll bet you can't find one worse than I found. And so the dialogue would go like this. I certainly can. And he says, CenturyLink. And I go, wait a minute. That's what I was going to say. They are miserable, absolutely miserable. The only thing that they get right is raising the rates. That's the only thing that they get right. It's impossible. It's impossible to carry on orderly business and be a CenturyLink customer. And if I could change, I would. If there were any alternative that were viable, I would be gone. Now, I've only been a loyal customer for 12 years. I guess that's probably a record with those thugs. They're miserable, absolutely miserable. So last night I came home from the big city, Springfield, Missouri, after sitting in the dentist chair for a checkup and getting some supplies for the farm. And so I went to get on the computer, and no internet. Okay. So I called CenturyLink. Now, I know the number by heart. Who knows the tech support number for their internet provider by heart? I picked up the phone. Now, the phone was working. I picked up the phone, and Mrs. Finelli says, "Who are you calling?" And then I just kind of smiled, and she said, "You know their number by heart?" And I said, Of course. We've been a customer for 12 years, and these guys are, I'm always calling them. So, because the internet's down so often, well, they say it's going to be back by 8:30 p.m. 8:35, it's not back. I call them. Then the new message says 10:30 p.m. 10:30 comes around, 10:35, I call them. New message says 12:30 a.m. Okay, that's pretty good. So I finally go to sleep, get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, call them up. No, they have no restoration time. They have not figured out when they're going to get it fixed. Then I call them at 7:30 this morning. They've got a new estimated time, 1:30 p.m. Well, that's after the broadcast. So I've got the computers up. My end is working just fine. Their end, it's horrible. Their technical support initially is in the Philippines, and I have no problem calling the Philippines. But I do have a problem with them not being able to answer the questions. Not because they don't speak English. They speak English just fine. But they don't have the information in front of them. So when I call the Philippines after being on the phone for about 15 minutes trying to get through, they have to call the United States and say, got this customer of ours, Finelli, he can't get on the internet. The system says it's working. Is it working? And then And then, well, try this, go out to the point of presence box outside, do this, and then call us back. So then it's another 15 minutes on the phone waiting to talk to somebody to say, you know what? Everything I told you the first time is still true. It still doesn't work. That's what it's like dealing with CenturyLink, the most miserable internet provider, in my opinion, I've ever had the displeasure of working with. And if I could, I would dump them in a heartbeat. So the only thing I could do, if I owned stock in CenturyLink, and I wouldn't because that'd be a losing proposition. If I had stock, I would sell it. And that's what I think that we all should do. Anybody who has CenturyLink stock should sell it. Why? Because we need to send a message to the CEO whose compensation is probably based on the stock price. I can't say that for sure, but it's my opinion that his compensation or her compensation is somewhat dependent on the stock price. And if we get it to collapse, then maybe they pay attention and say, well, you know what? Instead of worrying about the stock price, we ought to worry about our customers. I want to tell you this, Rich, Scheben, and class. Back in the 1980s, I was tasked with a really neat challenge. I was in the banking environment, and I worked at a magnificent headquarters campus. I mean, it was like a golf course, literally, with a magnificent set of buildings on it. It was in the suburbs. It was as nice as could possibly be nice. My desk was outside the president's office, and it was cherry. The credenza was cherry. Really, cherry wood. Not that I was special. All the guys and gals that had, all the analysts outside the president's office had the same equipment that I had. It was first class. It was really, really nice. Well, we built a new building downtown, and that's where our army of telephone people would be, talking to customers. Thousands and thousands of customers, credit card customers. And my job at the time, I was a manager of data communications. My job was to link our IBM mainframes with the two buildings and our credit bureaus and so forth. And typically what was done back then was point-to-point communication. This is the mid-80s. Telephone lines, that kind of thing, modems. And I decided there was a better way of doing it. I wanted to use a new technology called a T1 multiplexer. And it used digital communications. And I was able to put 24 channels of communications on one pair of wires. That means 24 mainframes talking to 24 mainframes, or mainframes talking to terminals, IBM terminals, computers talking to computers. And I could mix on that same pair of wires up to 24 telephone calls on the same pair of wires. So I could connect these two buildings with one pair of wires. Or I could have point-to-point with 24 pairs of wires in the traditional approach. Well, I decided to use the high-tech approach, the T1 multiplexer. But when I did that, as I was doing, it was clear to me that if these wires ever failed, someone crashed into a telephone pole and took out the wires, we would be out of business until it was repaired. So what I did was I planned a diverse route. What that means is I had a direct, shortest path you can get to, point A to point B, and another path around the city, the long way, the scenic route, if you will, as a spare, hot standby, ready to go. And then I put in a switch, a high-speed, I mean really high-speed switch, that would detect if there was an outage on that line. And within nanoseconds, it would switch from the shortest path to the scenic route, and we would not miss a beat. The computers would stay connected, the calls would stay connected, everything would work seamlessly. And that's what I did. And that's what I think CenturyTel ought to think about. The reason I'm telling you that story is it was possible in 1985 and in 1984. We built one of the first ones, but the telephone company could use that kind of a strategy and keep the Internet working. And here's another point. The Internet is supposed to be almost fail-proof, right? If one section goes down, it should be self-healing and stay up. Well, it's not. So what does it mean? So the Internet's down, what does it mean? Well, I guess it means no Netflix, no television, no eBay, no Craigslist, no news, no email. And this wouldn't apply to any of us, or most of us it would not apply to, and that's no Facebook. That's what it means, at a minimum. And that's why it's so frustrating, because we've been dependent on it. And what does it mean for broadcasters? Networks will go down without the Internet. Networks will go down. If you think that we'll be able to continue doing what we're doing, broadcasting on this network and other networks, the hosts have their own studios, lots of them. They won't be able to connect unless they do what I'm doing and pick up the telephone. They have a landline. Landlines are up 99.97%. Landlines are the most reliable telecommunications medium we have. And they work great. Rich Scheben, your comments?
Well, first of all, I like to tell everybody I do not own a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure there's a few people fainting in the background there. But you mentioned customer service. Customer service pretty much sucks pretty much around the country today. There are exceptions to the rule, but very few of them. And that's because of some of the things that we've talked about in the past. When you basically eliminate the desire to take care of your own company and or country and your own people, and you eliminate patriotism, and you export inflation to low-cost producing countries, every time quality goes down and the profits for the very wealthy, the hierarchy of the company, goes up. Now, I believe I might have mentioned this last week or the week before, but I'm going to mention it again because it needs redundancy. We're in the looting stage of corporate America regarding its own people. They're protected by big government, mainstream media, and the courts. Basically, we have a fascist system. CEOs and CFOs are using 0% loans or very low-interest loans to buy back stock and give themselves huge bonuses. Now, not only are they buying stock, but central banks are buying stock. These are the two biggest phenomenons, what's keeping the stock market up. Now, keep in mind, 10% of the people own 96% of the stocks. So the stock market doesn't really affect the average Joe. Now, when you look at reinvestment into the company, it's not basically in people or products or service. They're eliminating core business models. And they're saying the credit rating's up. And it sounds like I'm going to finish the rest of this analogy on the back end after this break, Vince.
Rich Scheben's with us. Offgridmontana.com. Offgridmontana.com. We'll be right back. Rich Scheben's with us. And, Rich, please continue.
You bet, Vince. Well, basically what a lot of our corporations are doing, so-called even American corporations, they're trying to make everything look good on paper regarding their math and numbers. And that's why they're saying their credit rating's up. And then when everything looks good on paper, then they issue bonds. In other words, they're selling their debt. And then they bundle bad debt, even though they are toxic assets in a lot of cases, including junk status. And they mix these assets with what they call AAA government bonds and sell to the public. And what was AAA might not be AAA these days, especially in the corporate America zone. So they're selling to especially pension funds, and a lot of these pension funds are very desperate, and they're chasing yields. And, of course, all earnings are adjusted, which basically is a disclaimer for, I can do whatever I want with the math. And part of the reason why we have a fascist system is because the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, protects all these fraudsters. It's like the FDA and the AMA being owned by Big Pharma. Now, you have a lot of this legislation that comes out, like the Dodd-Frank Act, and it was supposed to stop a lot of this fraud and the credit rating ploys that they're putting forth. But the SEC allows this. It's supposed to protect a lot of these laws are supposed to protect the little guy and the small banks. But instead, a lot of these places are going out of business because the big business, the big corporate oligarchies protected by the fascist system, they have the exceptions. They can dodge. They get the exemptions. They have the lobbying. They can increase regs or decrease regs. A lot of cases, they increase regs so small and medium-sized businesses can't compete with them. So basically, the results are the big guys get all the benefits, all the profits, without having to work hard in the realm of competition and increasing quality. And the results are low wages, low good jobs, low small business growth, and with no chance of expanding the economy. So the so-called recovery that you've been reading about for the last umpteen years is all a fraud. It's basically done through corruption, manipulation, nepotism, and deception. And this is one of the reasons why the little guy has to start thinking outside the box, has to start thinking about self-sufficiency, and getting away from the technocracy the best they can so they don't have to deal with the poor customer service, and they don't have to deal with the fraudsters stealing our data and doing everything that they're doing. We're losing so much ground. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. That should be unacceptable. And that's why the little people, the bottom 93%, need to come together and not allow the powers that be to distract them down and divide us by race, gender, sex, religion, ideology, generation. It goes on and on. I mean, their template is nothing but, that's why half of the questions are about gender baiting or race baiting or sex baiting. You know, the powers, the mainstream media especially, their job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology, sway public opinion, control the narrative, means, themes, talking points, and microphone. This is why we've turned into the divided groups of America from the United States of America. And we need to create public forums like this show and like talk radio in general, but we need to create public forums. I would love to see ideas and solutions conferences in every county in America. So let's say there's 3,100 counties or somewhere in that vicinity. Can you imagine the progress we would make and literally take a lot of those followers and make them thinkers again so they can control their own destiny? Wouldn't that be a great idea, Vince?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And talking about profits, I'm so frustrated. I'm looking at this pen. It's a ballpoint pen, and it says Citizens Bank on it. And someone must have left it at the house. Anyway, I'm using the pen right now, and I decided to open this thing up to see how big the ink reservoir in this pen is. These Chinese have thinned out the ink tube so small, so thin, that if they made it any thinner, it would collapse under use, right? It holds so little ink that we are throwing these pens away, filling our landfills with these junky pens. They could add 5 times more ink, and it'd be so much nicer. No, that's not what they've done. They've inflated. They've inflated the pens, so they don't even hold much ink anymore. We'll be right back. Yeah, I think today's the day I rant. You know, so Rich Scheben, I bought these nickel iron batteries and or cells. They're pretty expensive, and they came from China, and they came with these screw-on caps, and they're great for shipping these electrolyte-filled 80-plus pound cells from China in these large crates. Anyway, I have about 4,400 pounds of these nickel iron cells, and they came with these screw-on fill caps and vents. And what was nice is they also came with these flip-top caps. They take off the screw-on cap, and you screw in this flip-top cap. And these flip-top caps have a built-in funnel. And you flip the cap open, and you can pour a quart of water, distilled water, in them every 2 months or so. That's how much distilled water we have to add. 10 gallons of water every 2 months. 1 quart per cell. Yeah, 1 quart per cell, 40 cells. Yeah, it's an enormous amount of distilled water. Anyway, so it's got these flip-top caps, 40 of them, and I complained that hey, the flip tops don't stay shut. They pop open. Now, the only reason that I would be concerned about that is you can't let dust get in these batteries or these cells. It destroys them. So you got to keep the caps closed. You have to be really, really clean around these cells. And the other thing is that when they're open, they bubble so much that the electrolyte can come flying out, which is corrosive, and it's dangerous. And also you lose electrolyte. You know, the water evaporates. So we want these darn things to stay closed. So we contact the Chinese manufacturer, and we say, hey, 6 of these caps don't stay closed. And a day or two later, they respond, oh, that was a gift. That was a gift. We don't warranty gifts. This is the kind of nonsense that you go through today with companies. They allege that they have warranties, and then they renege on them. And can you imagine that? Can you imagine them saying that this is a gift? The part that they ship with the cells is a gift? Unbelievable. Okay? Let's go to Amazon. So I have this array of fluorescent lights. There are 12 shop lights in an array that we use for illumination here at the farm. 12 of them, and each one has 2 fluorescent tubes, 40 watts each. They say 40 and 40 is 80 watts, and then you have the loss of the ballast in the circuit, and so let's say 100 watts per fluorescent fixture. 12 of them. 12 times 100 watts is 1,200 watts. That's nice when you're on the grid, if you can afford that much electricity. However, I need to shed watts. So I found a solution. I bought 16 light bulbs, regular Edison-based light bulbs, 8 watts apiece, 8.5 actually. And I made an array that will do the job. It won't be as bright as the fluorescence, but it'll work. So 8.5 watts, and I worked out so I can use just 8 of them. So that's 68 watts. So I can come down from 1,200 watts to 68 watts and almost do the same job. In order to do this, I needed to make the job simple, and I went to Home Depot when I was in Springfield yesterday. And I'm looking around for the department that has brackets to easily mount these 2x4s that I have these light fixtures attached to. Well, I'm having trouble finding them. And even more difficult than that was finding somebody to help me find them. And I thought, where'd everybody go? I can't find any employees here. I was really considering going into the men's room and saying, hey, y'all in there? Where are you guys? And then if that didn't work, I was going to go into the break room and say, any of you guys working today? Where's everybody? That's what it's like at Home Depot now. I'm not exaggerating. So they're falling down. And a lot of the people that they hire at these stores have no clue. They don't know what they're doing. Literally. They don't know what they're doing. And at Amazon, the light bulbs arrived. Now these are like, they look like incandescent light bulbs. The regular standard kind that you would screw in, like the 100-watt light bulbs. That's what they look like. There were 16 of them in a package. And I asked my son, he was on the internet several days ago, and I said, would you mind ordering these for me? And so he ordered them for me. And he decided he was going to buy a book at the same time, a heavy book. Well, the engineers at Amazon figured out that, you know what? We can put the light bulbs in the same box with the book, and we can save a lot of money because we won't put any padding in there. We'll let the light bulb slam into the book. Everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that's going on.
Well, you know what, Vince? And I just got to interrupt you for 1 second, and then you can continue. But Albert Einstein, and this quote will basically tell you where we're going. He said, "I fear the day that technology will surpass our human interaction, because the world will then have generations of idiots." And that debate could be could be ongoing today. So we need to get back to communication. We need to get back to sitting by the fire. We need to get back to relearning those lost 19th century skills, but dovetail them with 21st century technology. And, we got to know how to find the North Star again, raise animals, harvest their own produce. You got to know how to berry pick and mushroom pick and grow your own garden and hunt and butcher animals and edible plants. And most people don't even know that when you have a cloudy night, you have warmer days because the heat stays, it's covered like a blanket. We need to get that balance back between nature and technology. And I feel that because today's youth especially, who are working in these Home Depot stores in a lot of cases, they're looking down, their thumbs are moving at some type of iPad or cell phone, and they're losing the human interaction and communication skills. And I think that has a lot to do with it. But when you're done on your rant, I want to talk about China for a minute, and I have an article I think that your listeners would be interested in regarding your pen analogy and the products coming out of China.
Okay. Let me just say one thing before we do that. This is short. So I'm looking at, I've got 5 computer screens in front of me. Okay, none of them is connected to the internet. All right, so I can bring up the calculator and I can do some arithmetic on one of the screens. I can certainly do that. And I'm looking at one that has the call screen on it. Now, this is the screen that I dedicate in the studio to taking telephone calls into the broadcast. So what happens is when someone's listening in class, one of our students may be listening, or one of our instructors may decide to call the number to get on the air with us. Well, what happens is our engineer, in today's case it would be Nathan, he would answer the call in Minnesota at GCN. He'd take the call and he'd say, "Hey, this is USA Prepares. I'm Nathan. How may I help you?" And the person calling may say, "I'd like to talk to Vinny and Rich Scheben about ABC." And Nathan would say, "Well, that's great. Let me put you on hold, but where are you calling from?" And the guy may say Texas. So I would see on the call screen the line number, Texas, the person's first name, and he'd like to talk about ABC. Now, why is that? It's not like I filter the calls so that we don't talk about certain subjects. That's not it at all. It would be nice to know that the person is calling about something germane to the discussion, where he's calling from, and his first name, or her first name, right? Wouldn't that be nice? Well, that's what I have in front of me. Now, I can use my mouse, and I can click on that screen, and I can say, there's a button that says air. That means put the person on the air. I click that, and I can say, welcome, you're on the air. Okay? I can say drop. If I want to disconnect the call, I can do that. Or I can put the person on hold. Well, I can't do that because the Internet's down. So how do I take calls today? We can't. Well, not easily. I mean, we could do it the hard way, but it's certainly not as nice as when the Internet's up. And thank you very much, CenturyLink. The Internet's down again. So, when you think about problems that you're going to have, and we talk about the supply chain, this is just a micro example of what it's going to be like. Just a micro example. You want to research a product before you buy it? Lots of luck without the Internet. You want to get that telephone number because you don't have a telephone book? Lots of luck. So what I do, I've got a Rolodex. I've got an antique Rolodex on my desk. Why? People look at that and say, "Really? Use a Rolodex?" You bet. Because when the Internet's down, that Rolodex still works. I don't even have to put batteries in it. It works. Mm-hmm. Back to you. Boy, am I frustrated.
Yeah, well, it's going to get a lot worse because first of all, Vince, look out your northwest window. I'm in the process of sending you smoke signals so you can read the article. This title of this article I'm about to paraphrase here. Basically, it says that big data meets big brother as China moves to rate its citizens, and they're using companies like the Google, Alphabet, Facebook, etc., to basically create this spying activity. That's why you've heard all of us in USA Prepares saying that the word spy is analogous to the word smart. So be careful. Anything that you have is smart. They're going to know what you're doing when you're home, etc. So basically what the Chinese are doing, because you can't criticize the government over in China. They say that they're a capitalistic system, but that's why they keep the communist label, despite all the new billionaires that they have, because they want to keep people under their thumb. They want to make you submissive and break your will. And that's how they do this, is by group identity politics, not so much in China, but here especially. And they use the media, Hegelian dialectic, professional wordsmithing, and you can't go 5 minutes in a movie without getting subliminal or overt messaging. So after the break, I'm going to go into some of the details regarding the punishment of what the citizen score will be to people who don't toe the line in China. Vince?
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to hearing that. Rich Sheben's with us. OffGridMontana.com. That's Rich Sheben's with us. OffGridMontana.com. Or as Amazon would say it, OffGridMontana.com. Rich, you were talking about China and punishment.
Yeah, some of the there's a lot of examples on how they're going to give negative scores to their people who speak up against fascism or the powers that be, or corruption, manipulation, nepotism, deception, doesn't matter. Basically, the futuristic version of Big Brother, along with the state, is going to be out of control with this new social credit system to rate, quote-unquote, trustworthiness from its citizens. Now, think about how this is going to work. Hard work, effort, proven results, qualifications, everything that builds commerce is not going to make any difference. It's going to be based on trust and sincerity. In other words, people who keep their mouth shut and go along with the status quo. Some of the punishments are going to be low ratings. If you get low ratings, you have slower internet speed. They're going to restrict access to restaurants. You're not going to have right to travel. It truly is an Orwellian political twist, as I am paraphrasing from this article. And it's our own Amazon's consumer tracking. See, the thing is, a lot of these big companies, these FANG companies, these AI companies, they know that this design is to steal tens, if not hundreds of millions of jobs from the Western world and the Eastern world regarding robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. And this technocracy is basically going to create systems like this system to restrict people from doing things based on keeping their mouth shut. And go, if you want to go in, if the powers that be want to stick you in a gas chamber, you better go in there. And that's where we're heading. Because, and this is one of the reasons why the powers that be talk about universal income for everybody on the planet, or at least in America or the Western world, is because for the last 20 years, universal income has been done for the wealthy regarding the inflationary process of inflating the dollar, printing money by pressing a button, just out of thin air. And I've mentioned this on many, many radio shows. It's pretty obvious that depending on what you read, the top 95% of the new printed money, from whether it be quantitative easing or whatever term they use, goes to the top, basically 7%, okay? And that's even disproportional, because the top 1% to 2% gets even more. So we can blame a lot of people, but the big blame goes to demographics, central bank, corrupt monetary policies, Keynesian economics, and group identity politics, which is AKA victim group status, AKA protectionist group status. And people always use the term divide and conquer, but it's more than that, folks. What group identity politics has done, it's lowered the bars of standards and expectations for getting a job and keeping a job so far. So the bar is so low that it has literally destroyed America. You cannot reward mediocrity for generation after generation, for decade after decade, without affecting ingenuity, productivity, innovation. It's all gone. And this is why the middle class, or the bottom 93%, is on the chopping block. So when we see articles like this, we have to start speaking up, because if you listen to USA Prepares, I give a little lecture on whose fault it is. And you can blame all the people in the world, including the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the rhinos, the neocons, but it's us. We're at fault, folks. The silent majority. We need to speak up. We need to wake up. We need to read research and say it like it is, based on truth and objective facts and not subjective emotional opinion. Vincent?
Well, I've got a bunch of comments, but I think we're going to have to wait till after the top of the hour news and commercial announcements. But I was thinking about if the internet worked right now, if CenturyLink had the internet up and running, I'd want to log into China Inc. and find out what your social score is, Rich Shealy. I'd love to know that.
Probably it's in the negatives.
We'll be right back after top of the hour news. Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of the USA Prepares. Rich Shealy's with us, offgridmontana.com. And class, during the top of the hour break, I was enjoying listening to the commercials, and I'm being serious. And let me just tell you how this works. If I decide to create a commercial, a 60-second commercial here in the studio, in my voice, and if I want to put some background music to it or sound effects or whatever, I've got the equipment to do that. Got the microphone and the mixer and so forth. And I could create the commercial, and I could use something called Audacity. It's a free program to edit sound. That's great, and you can download it from the internet if your internet is working. If you're in our neck of the woods and you're on CenturyLink, you'll have to wait till they decide to fix it. But here's what I'm trying to say. So if I create a commercial, I save it, and I can save it as an MP3. And then what would I do with that? I would email that as an attachment to an email to GCN or Republic Broadcasting or wherever I were sending it. And it would work great. Can't do it. Can't do it with the internet not working. And that's absolutely true. So what I'm trying to do is let you know how many things are dependent upon the internet. How many things? So, Rich, even a couple days ago, I diagnosed a problem with my old Mercedes, my 1996 Mercedes. It had what was called a phantom electrical leak, and the battery was draining. And the battery was good, but within about 6 hours, it would be dead. I could charge it up, and it'd be dead in 6 hours. While I was charging it, it was discharging. And so I was trying to find this phantom leak of electricity. Finally, after several goes at using an amp meter and tracking down where the leak could possibly be, I diagnosed it down to the alternator. And I realized that the alternator had a bad diode, which was allowing electricity to drain from the battery. So I shopped for an alternator because I found out that it would, by getting on the internet, I found out that if I wanted to buy a diode pack, it would be about $50-something. And if I wanted to replace the brushes in the alternator, it would be about, well, maybe even more than that with the regulator. By the time I was done, if I put the bearings in it, it would cost twice as much as buying a rebuilt alternator. So I contacted AutoZone, negotiated the price. They want $140. They decided to sell it to me for $92, which is kind of nice. And then, but they didn't tell me that I needed a puller, because I need to use my old pulley. Yeah, I understood that, but I couldn't get it off with the puller I had. So I needed to go back to AutoZone, and they have a loaner tools that you put the deposit on, and when you return the tool, they give you your full deposit back. So it's not like you pay to rent it. It's like a deposit on a loaner. So I called up my friend at AutoZone, and I said, here's what I need. Do you have one? And he said, yeah, Yeah, I said, can you put my name on it, and I'll be in there in about an hour or so. Can you do that? Sure. Okay, so he did that. And he reserved it for me because it's around a 50-mile or 60-mile trip to go to AutoZone and back. And so I get to AutoZone, and my friend, was gone for the day. He left. And so the young guy there, the millennial, was there. And I said, hey, Mark, put this on hold for me. And I had to show this guy what this part was. I had to explain it to him. I had to describe it. I had to show him a picture of it. And he went in the back room, and he came back all flustered and said, I can't find it. I said, well, no, it's got to be back there. Mark put it back there. I know he did. So I went to the back room. A few minutes later, he comes back. No, it's not back there. I said, it's got to be here. Mark put it on hold for me. And so this guy got tied up with another customer. And so my son and I just walked out. Now, normally I'd be a little more polite than that. Normally I'd say, listen, just never mind. We're going to go across the street to another auto parts store, and we'll rent theirs. But I didn't. I was so frustrated that this millennial got distracted. He forgot all about me, a regular customer there. Forgot all about me, doesn't know what he's doing and can't find it. And the store's in disarray because poor communication. That's what we're facing. We're facing people who don't know what they're doing and who are losing sight of customers and what customers want. So I went to the other auto parts store in that town. Extremely frustrating. So back to your score in the Chinese social score system. I think all of us would have a terrible score, way in the negatives, and it's based on trustworthiness, right? So the more trustworthy you are, the higher positive score you would have. But we would end up with extreme negative scores because we, don't follow the rules too well? Is that it?
May I expand on that?
Yeah, please.
First of all, the word trustworthy is in quotes. Okay, that's the term that the powers that be use in order to keep the people submissive and break their will so they don't speak up. Okay, so they're going to use those politically correct buzzwords, and that's why I use a lot of economic and financial analogies when I give a talk or I'm on the radio show, as you know, Vince. And let me just do it right now. 40% of people can't come up with $500 in America. 50% can't come up with $1,000. 69% have less than $1,000 in the bank. 78% of people live paycheck to paycheck. Okay, 1% of the people own 83% of the stocks. 10% own 96%. Basically, the middle class has melded in with the poor, and that's why I talk about, because of these inequalities, the bottom 93% as the new middle class or poor, okay? We've created an incognito caste system. People are confused. It's not a left-right paradigm. The ideology part is minimal. It's mostly to keep the masses under control. So when you look at these numbers and you say to yourself, gosh, let's look at more politically correct buzzwords, just like the article is using, or Chinese is using the term trustworthy in quotes. Now, the numbers I just shared with you folks, think about all the numbers that the mainstream media, that the court system uses, and big corporate oligarchies and big government, in other words, our fascist system. They use terms like equality, fairness, tolerance, diversity, accountability, prosperity, inclusiveness. Now, does any of those words apply to the outcomes of what's really happening in America? Hell no. Now, you might be able to sell me on inclusiveness because we're all getting poor evenly and equally, but those other politically correct buzzwords, everything's done to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people by groups. And that's why I put this slightly over demographics, central bank corrupt monetary policies, and Keynesian economics. I put this slightly above, even though all four are fairly equal. Group identity politics has been the biggest insult to work ethic, ability, and intelligence of all these people. It degrades every minority. It disrespects every person out there. And this is why we don't have any synergy. When the powers that be says your group can't compete, your work is suboptimal, you're not empowering a nation or a group. You're lowering the bars of standards and expectations. And it makes victim groups or protectionist groups out of pretty much everybody out there, especially if they're not a poor/middle class white male heterosexual with a Christian name. And it just insults our country. It insults America. And this is why they call you these names, like controversial, extreme racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, violent hater, conspiracy theorist with an anti in front of every word you can think of, and an ismist and phobia on the back of every word you can think of. We are basically, we've lowered the bars of standards and expectations for getting a job and keeping a job so low. Again, the rewarding of mediocrity has literally destroyed our country. And this is why I think self-sufficiency, whether you live off-grid or whatever you do, just like Vincent was talking about working on his own machinery, because he has farm machinery as well, we all have to do something to live below our means and find the fine line between needs and wants. Whatever our skill sets or our desires, whether it be hunting meat or catching fish or growing produce or raising animals or living off-grid or harvesting firewood on your property, whatever it may be, there are ways to reduce costs and become more self-sufficient. I mean, we're literally teaching our young generations how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. They're not coming out with any skill sets. Even college, 90% of the degrees are worthless. It's mostly social indoctrination. I'm reading articles. You want to hear about trends? I'm reading articles now that in 10 to 15 years, 50% of the colleges are going to be out of business, especially the private smaller colleges, because they don't get the subsidies. See, most wealthy people get that way because they use the opportunity of the state and not serving the customers or people anymore, or free markets. It's basically subsidies and bubbles and manipulation that's making the wealthy super wealthy. This is why they want universal income, because they know the people are waking up to the fact that the super wealthy has been on universal income for the past 20 years. Vincent?
So many comments I have about all those things you said, but, you know, you're talking about the colleges and universities, and I've said this before. When the university that I attended and graduated from calls, begging for money to help the new students overpay for their tuition and room and board, I always respond the same way. I'm so glad you called. Thanks so much. This is about my refund, right? And that's because so much of what I learned in college was useless. You're absolutely right. Useless. Now, I did learn some facts, and I did learn how to think, and that was the most important thing. But a lot of what I learned was absolutely useless. So it can be done faster. You can do what I've done. I've hooked up a connection between the television screen and the computer to watch YouTube videos in the kitchen as a family when the internet works. We'll be right back. And if you are considered trustworthy by the government of China, that would help you get a higher score. You can get into restaurants. You'll have faster internet and so forth. And if you have a lower score, you would be deemed not trustworthy, which is the exact opposite of our definitions of trustworthiness. So what they mean by trustworthiness, as I'm reading into this, reading between the lines, is to the Chinese government, someone who is trustworthy is trusted not to step out of line. Someone who is trusted not to dissent. Someone who is trusted not to speak out. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and some.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keep in mind, Facebook and the Googles, the Zuckerbergs, they're all in on it, and they go on to the highest bidder because they're even getting CIA contracts. So it truly is the aristocracy versus the serfs, folks, and not a left-right paradigm. But and just to show you how the technocracy works against the people, you mentioned my book, and I'm going to throw a disclaimer out there. I do this every once in a while, folks. Basically, I don't even know what you're going to get if you order my book. Amazon stopped paying me, and I hear on a weekly basis of people who read my book, whether it be the electronic version, and that could be really distorted. But they're deleting 5-star reviews. They're replacing it through incrementalism, chronologically, with poorer reviews and getting rid of my 5-star reviews. They're saying my book is out of stock, and that's part of this technocracy, censorship, surveillance world we live in. They're misspelling my book title, like Vince mentioned earlier, so search engines couldn't pick it up. I got a phone call from Amazon a few years ago saying that the powers that be here, the people like my book a lot, but the powers that be are doing everything to censor it. And I've had books returned to me, deleted chapters, moving sentences, picking up certain words and deleting them. You know, we really are in a 1984 Orwellian nightmare right now. So I just needed to mention that as well. So this is why we have to wake up. We have to read as much as we can. We have to research. We have to communicate, folks, and get that balance back between nature and technology. Pardon the interruption there, Vince, but I just wanted to throw that in.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, there's something else that's going on that I really despise. It seems like every time I leave the farm and I get in my old Mercedes or my old truck and I head out to the big city of Springfield, and I watch the traffic in front of me. I look to the left, look to the right, look behind me all the time, okay? I'm really paying attention. I'm not on a cell phone. I don't have one. I don't even listen to the radio, okay? So I'm operating my vehicle with my full attention to operating my vehicle. Anyway, so the new phenomenon is I see people in front of me with either a truck and a trailer or a car, and I say to myself, okay, he's got the window now to pull out in front of me. He can pull out in front of me. He can pull out in front of me. Okay, the window is gone. It's now unsafe to pull out. It's unsafe. He's not going to pull out. Nope, he's not going to pull out. And that's when he pulls out in front of me and cuts me off. That's the kind of thing that happens like every single time I go to Springfield without fail. Yesterday, it was a red Audi two-seater sports car, a TT, and I had a camera in the car. We took a picture of it, and I may even post this guy's license plate and on the internet. And so what do we do with these careless, reckless drivers? I think the only thing we can do is have a website that shows who they are, okay? Well, I'm sure they'll be frosted and threaten me and all that kind of stuff, but facts are facts. And here's the new thing. The new thing that I do before I leave the farm, you know, I walk around the vehicle, make sure the tires are inflated properly, do a visual inspection, make sure no animals are behind or underneath the vehicle when I back up, because I don't want to run over any of our family members because they're asleep under the car or behind the car or truck or something like that. Well, now the new thing is I oil my horn. I want to make sure that darn thing works really, really well. I'm only kidding about the oil, but what I'm saying is when somebody pulls out and cuts me off like they did yesterday, 10 seconds on the horn. I don't mean 1, 2, 3. I mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds. Rich Scheben with us today. So, Rich, let me tell you a little bit about my concern about America. I mean, I have many, many concerns. But just one small concern is our failing infrastructure. And one of the things I'm talking about, well, I'll just talk about telephone lines. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, if you are going to dig a hole, they require you by law to call an 800 number, and it's 1-800-MISS-UTILITY, M-I-S-S, utility. Now, when I lived in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I thought, what a nice name, Miss Utility. You know, I'm thinking of a young lady and, you know, the sweet person on the end of the phone helping me so that if I'm going to drill some holes, put some fencing in, I'm not going to cause problems for my neighbors. Miss Utility. No, that's not what it is. It's Miss Utility is let's not hit the utility. Let's miss the utility. Not a young lady, but let's miss hitting the utility, meaning the underground cable. Okay, so you call before you dig. And they've got like 48 hours to come out and spray paint your yard, your lawn, your fields, the area that you're going to be doing construction or digging a basement or a ditch or planting trees, whatever you're doing, they want to make sure that you don't dig through their wires. Seems reasonable to me. Okay. So we had a neighbor farmer back in Virginia, and he decided to put a fence in. Not just a barbed wire fence or high tensile fence. He wanted to put a really nice fence in, and I'm not kidding. He had some horses, and he was going to put up these board and post fence, about, maybe 500 feet long in his front yard. So he goes out to the center of the road, it's a paved road, and he measures 25 feet or so in from the center of the road to his field, where he's going to put his fence. So it's going to be off the road, and he wants to make sure that it's in line with the road and it looks nice. It's a curved road where he's putting this in. So he measures it, marks it, and gets in his tractor, and he has an auger. And the auger is it's like a big drill. And the auger was 12 inches. So he's drilling 12-inch holes into the ground, and it was clay, so it wasn't rocky. It was easy to do. And he's got all these areas where the posts are going to be, the fence posts, every 10 feet. So he drills the holes, and then our phone doesn't work, as well as everybody else's. So we finally get to see the telephone repair truck out there, and the guy's furious. The guy who's fixing the telephone lines is absolutely furious. Why? Because he's on his stomach reaching down 3 feet, 2.5 feet, where these wires are buried, and he's splicing them together. Now, this neighbor of ours drilled 500 feet of holes every 10 feet. 500 feet long, 10 feet apart. A lot of holes. And in these holes, he hit the phone line a bunch of times. So what do? The phone guy takes these splices, strips the wire, and splices them. Now, each hole is going to require 2 splices and a 12 or so inch piece of cable to connect where the hole was drilled through the wire. Okay, so now we're splicing all of these telephone lines, 2 connections per telephone line, and each side of the hole had to be connected twice, separately. So that's 4 splices per hole per telephone line. So this guy spends the whole day on his stomach putting together the telephone wires. Then the holes get filled in with some dirt, and then the new holes are drilled for the fence posts. Now, what I'm saying is that's a patch. That's not a permanent fix. However, now it's underground, and no one's thinking about it. And then the telephone lines get flaky, and then DSL for the Internet gets flaky, and we have problems forever until a new cable is installed. That's in Virginia. Now, in Missouri, on our farm, we have a creek that runs through the farm and then goes across the road. Well, the telephone company that originally installed the telephone lines was putting it underground, which is great. But they go through the creek. They put the telephone line through the creek, which is okay, except this creek that we have has rocks in it. When I say rocks, I mean the entire bottom is nothing but rocks, literally. And some of these rocks are 4,000 or 5,000 pounds. They're huge. They're like the size of half of a truck. And that's what's in the bottom of this creek. So the creek is wet most of the year. The rocks shift a little bit over time, heaving and thawing during the winter, and the cable gets compromised. The Internet gets flaky. So what does the telephone company do? Well, it's easy. They get a guy with a reel of cable, and he patches into the telephone line, and he strings the cable in the trees over the creek. And how long does it stay there? Years. Okay? Years. It took them about 4 or 5 years to get a backhoe in there to actually fix it right. I should go out and take a picture of that cable because it's still in the trees. Literally, it's still in the trees. But you can't reach it anymore because the trees grew. Rich, what I'm talking about is the stupidity of the American way. I'm talking about the top management probably said to this guy who's trying to fix the cable, oh, no, don't fix it right. Don't do that. Do you know how much it's going to cost to fix it right and give good service to our customers? You can't do that. Can't you string it through the trees? The guy probably said, "Are you serious? You want me to yeah, string it through the trees." So management tells this guy to string it through the trees, and he does. And then, what telephone company am I talking about? CenturyLink. It's ridiculous. It's absolute. Who in the right mind would do that? When I worked at Sears as a young auto mechanic, day number one, the shop foreman put his arm around me. I said this on the air before. The shop foreman put his arm around me and said, "Vinny, remember this as you go through life. May the job be big or small. Do it right or not at all." And how many times do we find time to do it right the second time or the third time? Can't do it right the first time, don't have time. So we have to do it twice or three or four times. We have time to do it over and over and over, but not time to do it right the first time. How often does that happen? All the time. It's frustrating. This is a symptom, just one small symptom of a country in decline.
Absolutely. In fact, if I may, Vince, I'd love to comment on that country in decline, your last comment.
Please do. Please do.
We just got our tax bill here in Montana for property tax not too long ago. And believe it or not, about several years ago, I had an appraiser from Lincoln County here in northwest Montana come out to verify the fact that I lived off grid and I didn't have modern conveniences, which positively affected my taxes. Well, apparently this guy, Dan, I'm not going to mention his last name until I see what happens here. He was put in here from the Flathead. Supposedly he came over and he changed the evaluations on my house, which increased my property taxes dramatically, to say the least. One of the things, and I verified this with a gal in Lincoln County here in northwest Montana, whose name is Bonnie. I'm not going to mention her name, but she was extremely helpful to me, and she told me what he had done. Besides putting me on the grid on paper, he also said I had modern heating system. He said I had 2 baths, and he said I had a finished basement. And the supervisor of this person, her name is Dawn. And I'll take it to their last names to the next level, depending on what happens here. But this is what's happening in America. There's no accountability, and this is what the fascist system's all about. They get protected by the mainstream media, by the big corporate oligarchies, by big government. See, and what they're doing, I don't know if they did this because I'm on the radio and I'm basically to help the bottom 93% with ideas and solutions, but we've gotten to the point where there's no accountability for fraud and corruption. Now, just think of people who are listening to the show right now, and they're thinking, and this is not just Lincoln County here in northwest Montana. This is happening all over Montana, all over the country. I would love to see, until government spending gets under control, I would love to see the elimination of property taxes. I would love to see a movement for that, because we're heading towards a very bad recession, probably the worst depression, or 50-50 shot of the worst depression we've ever seen, because all the books are cooked, everything's manipulated, all these numbers about this phony comeback is false and phony. Trump really inherited sabotage and demolition, I tell you right now. I mean, 8 people in the world have a higher net worth than half of the world combined. Come on. This isn't economy. This isn't finance. This isn't all these words: valuations, fundamentals, markets, liquidity, GDP, credit, debt, core businesses, money printing, free market, supply and demand, velocity of money. It's all a bunch of horse hockey. It means nothing. So we've gotten to the point where the powers that be can do anything they want. During the last depression, even people who were out of debt lost their homes because they couldn't afford to pay the taxes. Folks, this is where we're heading. Okay, it's a war against the poor and the middle class of America. We have to get together. We have to abolish these official authorities immediately and really start working on controlling our own destiny for the bottom 93%, because everything that's happening is to basically feather the nest of the elite in order to control the people. So I wanted to mention that particular story because When the government, even if it's local, can come in and change your evaluations, put you on the grid. Say you have a modern heating system, 2 baths, finished basement. Folks, I don't even have 1 bath. My indoor toilet, I flush with a bucket of water. I have no interior pipes. I heat my cabin with a Amish-made wood cook stove, and I use gravity-feed water that I fill with a garden hose every 2 months. So the powers that be are doing everything, just like it's analogous to Obamacare. First of all, you break the backbone of the middle class with high premiums. It fails by purpose, and the federal government takes over on a single-payer system. Vince?
Wow, do I have some comments? You'll hear them when I come back. Yeah. I've got some comments about what you said about the taxation, the valuation of your... Rich Sheben's with us. Rich, of all the things that you could have said during this broadcast, you mentioned tax fraud, and that hit one of my buttons. I mean, boy, does it frost me. Well, here's my response, and I'm talking about tax fraud. That's a term that they use. I'm talking about the government when they refer to us, tax fraud. No. They got backwards. The tax fraud that you're talking about is fraud perpetrated by your county government in your real property taxes. You mentioned Dan, a guy's name, didn't give his last name. He changed the valuation of your property. He said that you have a modern heating system, you have a finished basement, you have 2 baths. How does he know? He hasn't been in your house. He made it up. He made it up. Okay?
Yes, he did.
Now, here's what happens. So when they make this kind of stuff up, they send you a bill, and you get this a few numbers on this annual bill, and they expect you to pay it. Well, class, ask them, demand, and I've done this twice. I've demanded an itemized valuation. Okay, where did these numbers come from? The land, the improvement, and so forth. Where did these numbers come from? Show me the square footage you're talking about. Show me the land value you're talking about. Each part of our property has different grades of land. I want to see it. And what I did, literally, I've done this twice, and I won both times. I went down and I challenged the county assessor. The latest time was just months ago. And I showed up. I made an appointment. I showed up, and they said, okay, they were going to go over this at the counter with me. I said, no, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. Let's get comfortable. And it took hours. It took hours, and I got our taxes lowered because they made some assumptions that weren't true. Now, they could have challenged me and said, Finelli, prove that we're wrong. Okay, you have to make an appointment with me. And when it's convenient, I will meet with you, and we'll go over this at the farm. But no, we looked at satellite photos. I challenged it, and I got our taxes lowered. Now, here's the way to do this with your buddy Dan and Bonnie. I think you should send them a link. Call them up and say, hey, I just need your email address. I'm going to send you a link to today's broadcast. Now, I'm on every Tuesday with this guy, Vincent Finelli. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what you did, Dan. And we're going to give out your phone number, Dan. And we're going to make sure that everybody gives you the credit that you deserve for the tax fraud that you're perpetrating, Dan.
And I think we should keep this in perpetuity, this case, and we'll mention this every week when I'm on the air and see where this goes. Because, as I mentioned earlier, Vince, it's so important that I did have an assessor come out a few years ago and assess the fact that I was off-grid and I didn't have a daylight basement finished and I didn't have 2 baths, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that they literally went in and changed my database so they could raise my taxes really is fraud. Now think about the consequences here. Think about people who are listening to this broadcast across the country, and they're saying, oh, my God, Montana's crooked.
Yeah, it is.
Montana's crooked.
So is Missouri.
So the realtors right now are going to get some negative responses, and so are the landowners, so are the subdividers, so are the developers, so everybody that does commerce in Montana. So the fraud has to stop from the bottom level. Everything has to change from the bottom up, folks, because the top is too corrupt.
Okay, so what do we do? Class, Dan needs to be fired. Dan, you need to be fired. I'm not kidding.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt because he did admit to some of those things that he had changed without seeing. He admitted that to me over the phone.
He needs to go to prison.
And Bonnie said he did other things that he's not admitting to. But Bonnie, who works at Lincoln County, does agree. So
he needs to be tried by a jury, and he needs to be convicted, and he needs to go to prison for fraud. Rich Shealy, here's what happens. That tax amount, had you not challenged it, would be that increased amount you'd be paying forever. And so would the next owners if you decided to sell. This is fraud. These guys need to go to prison. Yeah. There you go. Rich Shealy, thanks so much for being with us. I really appreciate you sharing with us your wealth of information.
Thank you, Vincent.
And we're going to get Dan. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.